The neon sign flickered above the dusty diner on the edge of Route 66, casting a red glow over the cracked asphalt parking lot. It was just past midnight, and the air hung heavy with the scent of sizzling grease and stale coffee. Inside, Emily wiped down the counter for the third time that night, her hands trembling slightly as she glanced at the clock. 22 years old. With calluses from too many double shifts and eyes shadowed by exhaustion, she was the last one standing in this forgotten outpost. The place was empty now, save for the lone figure at the corner booth, a weathered biker nursing a black coffee, his leather jacket scarred from roads long traveled. Emily's shift had started with the usual grind, but tonight felt heavier. Earlier, a group of roughnecks had rolled in, their laughter turning sharp as they ordered round after round. One of them, a burly man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, had leaned too close when she refilled his water, his breath sour with whiskey. "You work here alone, sweetheart? Bet it's lonely." He'd sneered, his hand brushing hers in a way that made her skin crawl. The others chuckled, but Emily held her ground, forcing a smile as she backed away. She'd dealt with worse in this line of work, leering stares, unwanted advances. But tonight, the isolation gnawed at her. Her boss had called in sick again, leaving her to close up solo, the diner's isolation amplifying every creak of the floorboards. As the clock ticked toward 1 a.m., the biker's presence was a quiet anchor. He hadn't spoken much, just nodded when she poured his coffee, his eyes deep-set and lined with the weight of unspoken stories, meeting hers briefly. His helmet sat on the table beside him, scuffed and battle-worn, like an old companion. Emily busied herself with the register, counting tips that barely covered rent, her mind drifting to the letter she'd hidden in her apron pocket. It had arrived that morning, postmarked from a small town up north. A plea from her estranged brother, begging for help after their mother's sudden illness. But money was tight, and pride kept her from asking for advances. The world felt like it was closing in, the diner's fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm of doubts. The door chime rattled her from her thoughts. The snake-tattooed man from earlier stumbled back in, alone this time, his eyes glassy and aggressive. "Forgot my keys," he grunted, but his gaze locked on Emily, not the lost item. He stepped closer to the counter, his shadow stretching across the linoleum. "You gonna help me look, or what?" His voice carried that edge, the kind that promised trouble. Emily's heart pounded. She gripped the edge of the counter, scanning for the phone behind the register. The biker shifted in his booth, but didn't move yet. The man leaned in, his fingers drumming on the wood. "Come on, don't be shy. Place is dead anyway." In that suspended moment, the air thickened with tension, the hum of the fridge the only sound breaking the silence. Emily's voice came out steady, though her pulse raced. "Keys are probably by your table, I'll check." But he didn't budge, his smirk widening. "Nah, I think they're somewhere else." The threat hung unspoken, and she felt the familiar chill of vulnerability, the diner suddenly feeling like a trap, then the scrape of a chair. The biker rose slowly, his boots thudding softly against the floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a salt-and-pepper beard that hid the faint scar running along his jaw, a remnant from a life of hard choices. Jacob, though she didn't know his name yet, moved with the deliberate calm of someone who'd stared down worse than this. He placed a few bills on the table and picked up his helmet, nodding to Emily. "Good coffee," he said simply, his voice gravelly from years on the wind. As he passed the counter, he set the helmet down in front of her, the weight of it thudding lightly. "Keep the change," he added, tipping an imaginary hat before heading for the door. The tattooed man snorted, stepping aside with a glare. But Jacob's presence filled the space like a shield. Outside, the roar of his motorcycle engine cut through the night, a low growl that echoed into the distance as he rode off into the starlit highway. Emily exhaled, her shoulders slumping as the door swung shut. The diner felt safe again, the intruder's keys forgotten on the floor where he'd dropped them in his haste to leave. She stared at the helmet, curiosity overriding her fatigue. It was heavier than expected, the interior lined with worn padding. Hesitant, she lifted the flap and froze. Nestled inside wasn't cash, but a folded envelope thick with bills. Her hands shook as she pulled it out, $5,000, crisp and unmarked, wrapped in a note scrawled in block letters. For the road ahead, promises kept, ride safe. Tears welled up, blurring the words. How had he known? In her haste earlier, had she let slip about the letter? Or was it something in her eyes? The quiet desperation she'd carried all night. The realization hit like a desert dawn, warm, unexpected, piercing. This stranger, this biker with the haunted gaze, had seen her struggle and acted without fanfare. Emily sank onto a stool, the helmet cradled in her lap, sobs breaking free. It wasn't just the money, it was the gesture, a thread of humanity in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Outside, the wind whispered through the lot, carrying the faint echo of an engine long gone, as if the night itself held its breath. But as the tears subsided, questions stirred. Who was he? And what promise drove a man like that to tip with his very armor? Emily tucked the envelope away, glancing at the clock. Dawn was hours off, but for the first time in months, hope flickered like the neon sign, faint but unyielding. The next morning, Emily arrived at the small apartment she shared with her aging neighbor, the helmet tucked under her arm like a talisman. She hadn't slept much, replaying the night in her mind, the way Jacob's eyes had held a depth of sorrow mirroring her own. Her mother's call came as she brewed coffee, the voice frail over the line. "Emily, it's getting worse. The hospital bills." Emily's throat tightened. The money would cover treatments at Santa Esperanza Clinic, buy time for the woman who'd raised her alone after their father vanished years ago. But sending it meant facing the past, the abandonment, the unanswered questions. She wired the funds that afternoon, her fingers lingering on the send button. As she stepped out for her shift, a news snippet on the diner's old TV caught her eye. A story about a biker convoy aiding a remote town after a storm, their leader known only as the Promise Keeper. Whispers of old oaths, brothers in leather bound by codes older than the roads they rode. Emily's pulse quickened. Was that him? The tattooed man from last night had slunk away, but trouble had a way of circling back. That evening, as rain pattered against the windows, another biker pulled into the lot, younger with a patch on his vest reading Iron Vow. He ordered pie and coffee, his gaze appraising. "Heard about a helmet tip," he said casually, sliding a photo across the counter. Jacob, younger, in military fatigues, arm around a soldier who looked eerily like Emily's missing father. "You seen this?" Her world tilted. The promise wasn't just for her. It unraveled a legacy of loss, loyalty tested by time. As thunder rolled, Emily realized the tip was the spark. Now, the ride truly began. Word count 872. The rain hammered the diner's roof like a relentless drumbeat, turning the parking lot into a shimmering black mirror that reflected the erratic flicker of the neon sign. Emily stood frozen behind the counter, the photo clutched in her hand, its edges blurring under the dim light. The young biker, Ryan, he'd introduced himself with a nod, leaned back on his stool, wiping water from his brow, his Iron Vow patch glistening like a badge of secrets. The image showed Jacob in desert fatigues, dust-caked and grinning fiercely, his arms slung around another soldier whose face Emily knew all too well, her father, Daniel, before the silence, before the abandonment that had shattered their family like brittle glass. "Where did you get this?" Emily's voice was a whisper, barely cutting through the storm's roar outside. Her fingers traced the faded lines of the photo, the two men linked by camaraderie forged in fire, far from the empty promises Daniel had left behind when he vanished without a word, leaving her mother to scrape by on diner wages and shattered dreams. Ryan's eyes, sharp and assessing, softened just a fraction. Old Brother's archive. Jacob doesn't talk much about the war, but that bond. It's ironclad. Your dad was one of us before the roads called him back. He made promises, ones that outlast bullets and borders. He paused, sipping his coffee, the steam curling like ghosts in the air. Jacob's been looking for loose ends. That helmet tip? Not random. He saw the letter in your apron when you bent to serve those drunks. Recognized the handwriting. Daniel's. Emily's knees buckled, and she gripped the counter to steady herself, the scent of fresh pie mingling with the metallic tang of rain seeping through the door. Memories flooded back unbidden. Daniel's rough hands teaching her to ride a bike on cracked suburban streets, his laughter echoing like thunder before the deployments pulled him away. Then nothing, no calls, no letters, just a void that her mother filled with quiet endurance. He's been gone 15 years. If he's alive, why hasn't he come back? And Jacob, what does he want from me? Ryan slid the photo back, his voice low and steady. Not from you, for you. Daniel saved Jacob's life in a sandstorm ambush, pulled him from a wrecked Humvee, promised to watch his back forever. But something broke Daniel after. Guilt, maybe. He rode out with us for a spell, then ghosted. Jacob's kept the vow alive, piecing together what he can. That money? It's seed from a fund we bikers pool for kin left behind. Your mum's illness. We heard whispers through old channels. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the lot where Ryan's bike stood sentinel, rain sluicing off its chrome like tears. Emily's mind raced, the pieces slotting into a mosaic of loyalty she hadn't known existed. The tattooed man from last night, had he been more than a drunk? His glare as Jacob left lingered in her thoughts, a shadow hinting at deeper currents. She glanced at the helmet still on the shelf behind the register, its scuffed surface now a portal to a hidden world of oaths and outlaws bound by honor. As the storm eased to a drizzle, Ryan stood, tossing a few coins for the pie. Jacob's riding north tomorrow, convoy style. If you want answers, meet us at the old Crossroads Bridge at dawn. Bring the helmet. It's more than protection. It's a key. He nodded once, the door chime announcing his exit into the night, leaving Emily alone with the hum of the fridge and the weight of revelations. She locked up late, the keys jingling like unanswered questions, and drove home through puddles that splashed her windshield. Her apartment was a modest refuge, walls papered with faded photos of better days. Her and her mother at a lakeside picnic, Daniel's shadow faint in the background. Sleep evaded her. Instead, she pored over the note from the helmet again, the block letters evoking Jacob's gravelly voice. Promises kept. What had her father promised? And why had Jacob, a stranger with eyes like weathered oak, chosen this moment to honor it? Dawn crept in grey and misty, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth and distant pine. Emily hesitated at her door, the helmet under her arm. Its weight a reminder of the chasm between her solitary life and this web of brotherhood. Her mother's voice echoed from a recent call. "Hold on, Em. Help's coming from somewhere." Was this it? She fired up her old sedan, the engine coughing to life, and headed for the crossroads, a forgotten span over a lazy river where Route 66 met forgotten trails. The bridge loomed ahead, shrouded in fog that rolled like smoke from a battlefield. As she parked, headlights pierced the haze, a convoy assembling, engines rumbling low like a pride of lions. 20 bikes, maybe more, their riders clad in leather, etched with symbols of vows unbroken. Jacob was there at the lead, his silhouette unmistakable as he turned, spotting her. No words at first, just a nod. Profound as a handshake across years, he approached, boots crunching gravel, and took the helmet without a flourish. You came. His voice carried the road's dust, rough but kind. Up close, the scar on his jaw gleamed faintly, a testament to battles shared with her father. Daniel spoke of you often, said you had his fire. We ride for Santa Esperanza today, escort your mom home, make sure the clinic doesn't bleed you dry. But there's more, traces of trouble following old trails. That snake in the diner, he's tied to folks who profited from Daniel's disappearance. Corruption in the ranks, back when he left the service. Emily's breath caught, the fog swirling around them like unresolved ghosts. The convoy's engines idled, a symphony of loyalty, as riders nodded her way, faces marked by their own scars, a chosen family forged in chrome and creed. Jacob mounted his bike, offering her a spare helmet from his saddlebag. Ride with us. Unravel the promise. For him, for you. She climbed on, the leather seat cool against her jeans, the world narrowing to the vibration under her and the road unfolding ahead. As they throttled forward, the bridge fading in the rear view, Emily felt the first stirrings of redemption, not just for her family, but for the honor her father might have lost. The wind whipped her hair, carrying whispers of justice, poetic and profound, as the convoy cut through the dawn like a blade of truth. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The convoy thundered along the cracked ribbon of highway, a steel serpent slicing through the morning mist that clung to the valleys like forgotten regrets. Emily gripped the back of Jacob's bike, her knuckles white against the worn leather, the spare helmet muffling the world into a focused roar. The vibration hummed through her bones, syncing with her heartbeat, as the wind tugged at her jacket, cool and insistent, carrying the earthy scent of dew-kissed sagebrush. 20 riders flanked them, engines harmonizing in a low growl that drowned out doubts, their shadows stretching long across the asphalt as the sun breached the horizon in a blaze of gold. Jacob rode point, his posture unyielding, the road ahead a blur of faded lines and distant mirages. Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice cutting through the rush. What happened to him? My father, Daniel. You said corruption. What does that mean? The words felt raw, pulled from a place she'd long buried under shifts and survival. He didn't turn, but his reply rumbled back like gravel under tires. War leaves marks deeper than scars. Daniel uncovered something rotten. Supply lines skimmed by suits back home. Brothers left without gear in the sand. He reported it quiet-like, but it painted a target. After the last tour, he rode with us to clear his head. Made a vow, protect the ones left behind no matter the cost. Then he vanished. We thought he'd gone rogue, but whispers say he dug too deep, crossed lines that don't forgive. The convoy crested a rise, the landscape opening to rolling hills dotted with skeletal oaks, their branches clawing at the sky. Emily's mind reeled, piecing together fragments. Her mother's weary stories of Daniel's restlessness, the unexplained debts that followed his absence, the way he'd always spoken of honor like it was a compass. Ahead, a faded sign marked the turnoff to Santa Esperanza Clinic, a squat building nestled against a backdrop of rust-red cliffs, its windows glinting like wary eyes. Hope flickered in her chest, tempered by the weight of Jacob's words. Corruption wasn't a ghost. It lingered, waiting to resurface. They pulled into the clinic's lot as the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows that danced across the gravel. Nurses in crisp uniforms paused mid-stride, eyes widening at the influx of leather-clad guardians, bikes forming a protective semicircle like sentinels from another era. Jacob killed his engine first, the sudden silence amplifying the distant call of a hawk wheeling overhead. Emily dismounted on unsteady legs, the helmet passed back to him with a nod of thanks. "She's in room 12, she said, leading the way through glass doors that whooshed open with a sterile sigh. Inside, the air was cool and antiseptic, laced with the faint bitterness of medicine. Emily's mother, Grace, lay propped in bed, her face pale against the white sheets, tubes snaking like fragile lifelines. She looked smaller than Emily remembered, the illness etching lines of quiet defiance around her eyes. At the sight of her daughter, and the entourage trailing behind, Grace's expression shifted from surprise to a soft, knowing smile. "Em? What's all this?" Emily knelt by the bed, taking her mother's hand, the skin paper-thin and warm. "Help, Mom. Real help." She introduced Jacob briefly, his presence filling the room like a steady anchor, while the other riders hung back in the hallway, respectful shadows offering nods to passing staff. Jacob pulled a chair close, his voice low as he explained the fund, the escort, the vow that bound them. Grace's eyes misted, searching his face. "Daniel, he mentioned friends like you, said you'd ride through fire for family." But as paperwork rustled and arrangements for discharge began, tension coiled in the air like smoke. A clinic administrator, a slick man in a tie too tight for the heat, entered with a clipboard, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Ms. Harper, we're glad for the support. But these bills, they're substantial. Insurance gaps, you understand." His gaze flicked to Jacob, then away, a flicker of unease betraying something sharper. Emily caught it, the same predatory glint she'd seen in the tattooed man's leer at the diner. Jacob leaned forward, his scar catching the fluorescent light. "We've covered it, in full, no gaps." The administrator hesitated, flipping pages with feigned busyness, but his phone buzzed insistently from his pocket. He stepped out, murmuring into it, his voice carrying fragments. "Bikers, old ties. Keep it quiet." Emily exchanged a glance with Jacob, the pieces aligning, the clinic's funding woes, whispers of padded invoices, echoes of the corruption Daniel had chased. Was this the same web? Strands reaching from desert battlefields to dusty highways. Outside, as Grace was wheeled toward an ambulance for the ride home, courtesy of the convoy's pooled resources, the administrator approached again, this time with 2 security guards flanking him, their postures rigid. "There's a hold on the release, questions about the fund's source. Unverified donors can complicate things." His tone dripped false concern, but Emily saw the bluff. The way his eyes darted to a black SUV idling at the lot's edge, its tinted windows hiding watchers. Jacob's hand rested on his helmet, a subtle barrier, as the riders shifted, engines priming with a collective rumble that vibrated the ground. "Complications end here," he said evenly, his voice carrying the weight of oaths unbroken. "We're not leaving without her." The standoff hung, the air thickening with unspoken threats, the hawk's cry piercing the moment like a warning. Emily stood by her mother, resolve hardening like cooling steel. This wasn't just about bills, it was the promise resurfacing, demanding justice against shadows that preyed on the vulnerable. Ryan pulled up beside her, his bike's kickstand scraping gravel. "Snake's crew. They run interference for the old guard, skimming aid, burying truths. Daniel crossed them, now they're circling kin." The SUV's door cracked open, revealing a familiar ink-snaked neck, the man from the diner smirking through the rain-slicked glass. Heart pounding, Emily realized the tip in the helmet wasn't charity alone. It was a beacon, drawing the convoy into the fray, where loyalty would be tested against the corrosion of greed. As the engines revved in unison, a wall of sound against the encroaching threat, Grace squeezed Emily's hand. "Like your father. Stand firm." The clinic doors swung wide, the ambulance edging forward under the biker's shield, the moral line drawn sharp in the midday sun. Redemption rode with them, not on chrome, but in the unyielding vow to protect what mattered, no matter the storm ahead. The standoff stretched taut under the relentless midday sun, the clinic's parking lot a crucible of chrome and suspicion. Engines idled like restrained beasts, their low thrum vibrating through the asphalt and into Emily's boots, syncing with the rapid pulse in her temples. The black SUV loomed at the lot's perimeter, its tinted windows impenetrable, but the snake-tattooed man, now stepping out with deliberate swagger, made no effort to hide his sneer. His jacket hung open, revealing the coiled ink that seemed to writhe in the heat, and two more figures emerged from the vehicle, burly shadows with folded arms and hard stares. The administrator hovered nearby, clipboard clutched like a shield, his earlier bluff crumbling under the weight of the biker's unblinking vigilance. Jacob dismounted first, his boots hitting gravel with a crunch that echoed finality. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Ryan, the iron vow patch on his vest, catching the light like a vow etched in steel. The convoy riders fanned out subtly, forming a human barrier between the ambulance and the intruders, their leather creaking softly as they shifted. No drawn weapons, no raised voices, just the quiet authority of men who'd faced sandstorms and betrayals, bound by codes that no suit could unravel. Emily stayed close to Grace's side, her mother's hand steady in hers, despite the pallor of illness. The ambulance doors open and waiting like a promise of sanctuary. "You think a pack of road dogs scares us?" The snake-tattooed man spat, his voice oily with false bravado, stepping forward until he was mere feet from Jacob. The air thickened with the scent of hot rubber and exhaust, mingling with the faint, acrid bite of fear sweat from the administrator. "This ain't your turf. Clinic's got rules. Funds like yours smell like trouble. We know about the old soldiers digging." Daniel Harper stirred the pot, and it boiled over. "You bikers playing hero? Cute, but heroes end up in ditches." Jacob's expression remained carved from stone, his eyes, those deep wells of restrained fury, locking onto the man's without flinching. The scar along his jaw tightened as he spoke, voice low and measured, carrying the gravel of endless miles. "Trouble's what you bring, slithering in shadows." Daniel didn't stir, he exposed. Skimmed supplies, falsified reports, profiting off brothers left to die. He vowed to set it right, and we're the echo. "Step aside. The woman's coming home." Emily's breath hitched, the words landing like fragments of a puzzle long scattered. Her father's face from the photo flashed in her mind. Young, fierce, arm around Jacob in that desert camaraderie. Had he uncovered this rot, this betrayal that twisted aid into greed? Grace squeezed her hand tighter, her whisper cutting through the tension. "He always said truth was heavier than any load. Don't let them bury it, Em." The ambulance attendant, a young nurse with wide eyes, hovered uncertainly, glancing between the groups as if the lot had become a battlefield without bullets. The snake man laughed, a bark that didn't reach his eyes, and gestured to his companions. They advanced a step, closing the gap, but the bikers matched them, boots scraping a wall of leather and resolve. Ryan's hand rested lightly on his handlebars, close enough to the throttle for a quick rev, a reminder that mobility was their edge. "Last warning," Ryan said evenly, his tone laced with the same quiet steel. "We ride for the forgotten. You prey on them. Daniel's trail leads here, padded bills, diverted funds, clinics bleeding folks dry while you line pockets. Walk away, or we'll make sure the light shines on your mess." From the SUV, a radio crackled faintly, urgent voices spilling out like spilled secrets. The administrator paled, his tie askew, and fumbled for his phone. I need to verify." But Jacob cut him off with a raised hand, not aggressive, but commanding. "Verify this. We're witnesses. Every rider here, push, and it goes public. Old files, Daniel's reports. The vow holds." The man's face twisted, caught between greed and exposure, and he backed toward the clinic doors, muttering about protocols. Tension peaked as the snake man lunged forward. not with fists, but a shove toward the ambulance, aiming to block the path. Chaos erupted in slow motion. Gravel flew. A biker intercepted with a firm shoulder check, voices overlapping in a roar of warnings. Emily pulled Grace back, her heart slamming against her ribs, the world narrowing to the glint of sunlight on chrome, and the desperate need to shield what was hers. But Jacob moved like a force of nature, grabbing the intruder's arm mid-motion, twisting just enough to unbalance without harm, his grip iron from years of holding lines in the heat. "Enough!" Jacob's command boomed, deeper than the engines freezing the fray. The snake man staggered, rubbing his wrist, hatred flashing in his eyes. But the tide had turned. Clinic staff emerged from the building, phones in hand, drawn by the commotion. Security, real ones, not the goons, radioed for calm, their badges a neutral ground. The administrator, cornered, waved a hand in surrender. "Fine, release approved, funds cleared." It was a retreat, grudging and laced with venom. As the snake man and his crew slunk back to the SUV, tires spinning dust as they peeled out, leaving a trail of unresolved threat hanging in the air. The ambulance rolled forward at last, escorted by the convoy's thunderous vanguard. Grace settled inside with a blanket and a faint smile of triumph. Emily rode beside it in her sedan, Jacob's bike pulling parallel, his nod through the window, a silent affirmation. As they crested the next hill, the clinic shrinking in the rear view like a bad dream fading, Emily felt the weight lift. Not gone, but shared. The snake's parting glare promised retaliation, echoes of the corruption Daniel had challenged, but the rider's loyalty was a shield forged in promises that time couldn't erode. They arrived at Grace's modest home by afternoon. The house, a weathered haven on the town's edge, surrounded by wildflowers nodding in the breeze. Unloading was a ritual of care, bikers carrying bags with gentle efficiency, Ryan joking lightly to ease Grace's discomfort, Jacob overseeing like a sentinel. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and fresh linens, a stark contrast to the clinic's sterility. Grace settled into her armchair, color returning to her cheeks as Emily brewed tea, the steam curling like released tension. "Thank you," Grace said to Jacob, her voice steady now, eyes searching his for traces of the man she'd loved. Daniel would be proud. He carried that fire, the one that says no to the dark. Jacob knelt briefly, helmet in hand, the scuffed surface a map of their shared history. He passed it on. "We're just keeping the road clear." As the sun dipped low, painting the room in warm hues, Emily realized this was redemption's first mile, not erasing the past, but honoring it through actions silent yet profound. But whispers from the riders hinted at more. Leads on Daniel, trails leading north where old scores waited. The promise wasn't kept yet. It was evolving, pulling them into deeper shadows for justice's sake. The evening settled soft, fireflies flickering outside like stars fallen to earth as the convoy prepared to camp nearby, a rotating watch against circling threats. Emily stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking underfoot, and watched Jacob polish his bike under the fading light, the rhythmic swipe a meditation. "What now?" she asked, the question hanging between them. He looked up, eyes reflecting the twilight. "We ride on, unravel the rest, for the vow." The wind carried the distant hum of engines, a chorus of loyalty as night wrapped the world in quiet resolve. The battle at the clinic was won, but the war for truth and family stretched ahead, demanding every ounce of their chosen bond. If this chapter moved you, please hit that like button below. It helps spread these stories of honor and heart to more who need them. Night draped the small town like a heavy cloak, the air cooling to a crisp edge that carried the faint chirp of crickets and the occasional crackle from the biker's campfire flickering in the yard. Emily sat on the porch steps, a mug of chamomile tea steaming in her hands, its herbal warmth seeping into her palms as she watched the shadows dance across the gravel drive. Grace had drifted to sleep inside, her breathing even for the first time in weeks, the weight of the day's victory settling like a balm, but peace felt fragile. A thin veil over the undercurrent stirred by Jacob's words earlier, the promise evolving, trails leading north where old scores simmered. Jacob emerged from the fire's glow, wiping his hands on a rag, the scent of oil and smoke clinging to his jacket like a second skin. He joined her without invitation, settling on the step below with a soft thud, his broad frame a reassuring bulk against the encroaching dark. The helmet rested between them, its scuffed dome catching the moonlight in silvery glints, a silent witness to the vows it had carried. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice low, gravelly as the road they'd ridden. Emily shook her head, the steam from her mug curling upward like unanswered questions. Too much spinning. Daniel, my dad, he really exposed all that, and these people, the snake and his crew, they're still out there, tied to it. Her fingers tightened around the ceramic, the heat grounding her as memories resurfaced. Childhood evenings with Daniel tinkering in the garage, his stories of duty laced with a fire she'd always admired but never fully understood. Jacob nodded slowly, staring into the night where the bikers' tents dotted the lawn like outposts. Ryan and a few others stood watch, their silhouettes etched against the embers, murmuring in low tones that blended with the wind rustling the wildflowers. He started small, questioning shipments that never reached the front lines. Gear shortfalls, meds diverted for black market flips. Brass covered it, but Daniel wouldn't let it lie. Filed reports, gathered proof, saved my hide more than once, pulling me from the fallout. His scar twitched faintly, a ghost of that desert chaos, the air there thick with sand and betrayal. A distant rumble pierced the quiet, not thunder, but engines, low and probing, circling the town's outskirts like predators scenting weakness. Emily's pulse quickened, the tea forgotten as she strained to listen. Jacob rose fluidly, hands signaling to the watchmen who mounted their bikes with practiced silence, headlights snapping on in a sweep of beams that cut the darkness. "They're testing," he said, mounting his own machine, the kickstand scraping like a drawn line in the dirt. "Won't strike tonight, but close enough to remind us." We move at first light, north to the old mill town. Daniel's last known stop. Whispers say he left a cache there, evidence that could crack the whole rotten core. Emily stood, the porch light casting her shadow long and wavering. Part of her screamed to stay, to guard this fragile haven with Grace safe inside, but the pull was stronger, the vow echoing in her blood, Daniel's fire kindling her own. "I'm coming," she said, the words firm despite the tremor in her chest. Jacob met her gaze, a flicker of approval in his eyes, deep as canyon echoes. "Suit up. Ryan will ride with you in the sedan. Safer for now." Dawn broke with a blush of pink across the horizon, the sky streaking like veins of resolve as the convoy assembled. Engines coughed to life in a symphony of growls, the vibration humming through the ground and into Emily's bones as she slid into her car. Ryan's shotgun with a map spread across his lap, marked with faded routes and circled spots. Grace watched from the doorway, bundled in a shawl, her frail hand raised in a wave that carried unspoken strength. "Bring him home, Em, or the truth of him." The words hung as they pulled out, the bikers forming a rolling phalanx around the vehicle, dust kicking up in swirling clouds that tasted of earth and anticipation. The road north wound through scrubland, asphalt buckling under the weight of forgotten summers, the sun climbing to bake the air with the scent of heated tar and wild thyme. Emily gripped the wheel, the sedan's engine straining against the pace, while Ryan pointed out landmarks, abandoned gas stations with rusted pumps, billboards peeling like old skin. Daniel holed up here after ghosting the service, he explained, tapping the map. Met a contact, someone skimming for the higher-ups. Passed intel, then vanished. If the Snake's crew is circling, they're after that cache. Burn it before it surfaces. Hours blurred into a tense rhythm, the convoy pausing only for fuel at a roadside stop, where wary locals nodded knowingly at the Iron Vow patches. Tension coiled tighter as they neared the mill town, a skeletal cluster of silos and decay huddled against a muddy river. The water sluggish and brown under the afternoon glare. Abandoned machinery loomed like relics, chains rattling faintly in the breeze. The air heavy with the musty tang of rust and neglect. Jacob signaled a halt at the town's edge, bikes fanning out to scout, their engines fading to whispers. Emily followed on foot with Ryan, boots crunching over shattered glass that glinted like false stars, her heart pounding a counterpoint to the eerie silence. They approached an old warehouse, its doors sagging on hinges. Graffiti scrawled like warnings across the corrugated walls. Jacob pushed inside first, flashlight beams slicing the gloom, revealing dust motes swirling in shafts of light piercing cracked windows. "Here," he murmured, kneeling by a loose floorboard, prying it up with a crowbar that groaned like a confession. Beneath lay a metal box, dented and locked, its surface etched with initials. D.H. Emily's breath caught, fingers brushing the cold steel as Jacob worked the combination, numbers whispered from memory. It clicked open, spilling contents, faded documents, a journal yellowed with age, photos of supply manifests marked with discrepancies. Daniel's handwriting filled the pages, accounts of diverted aid, names linked to the clinic's backers, the Snake Man's crew as enforcers. "Proof," Jacob said, voice thick with vindication passing a photo. Daniel, older, wary-eyed, time-stamped from years ago, standing with a shadowed figure who turned out to be the clinic administrator. But triumph soured as shouts erupted outside. Engines roaring, the Snake's SUV screeching into the lot, more vehicles joining in a blockade. Tires squealed, dust billowing like a storm, as armed figures spilled out, faces twisted in greed-fueled rage. "Hand it over!" the Snake Man bellowed, his tattoo gleaming under the sun, pistol glinting in his grip, not aimed yet, but a threat woven into the air. The bikers revved in response, a wall of chrome against the intrusion. But Emily saw the dilemma etched on Jacob's face. Fight here, risk the evidence, or run, preserving the vow's fragile hope. Ryan pulled her back. The journal clutched to her chest like a heartbeat. "We get this out. Justice isn't in blood, it's in the light." Chaos brewed as the standoff ignited. Bikes maneuvering to shield the warehouse, a feint to draw fire away. Jacob's eyes met hers through the fray, a nod sealing the pact. Protect the truth, honor the promise, even as shadows closed in. Emily bolted for the sedan, documents bundled under her arm, the weight of redemption propelling her forward into the fray's edge, where loyalty's fire burned brightest against the encroaching dark. Dust swirled like a furious spectre around the warehouse, the midday sun casting harsh shadows that twisted the standoff into a tableau of grit and defiance. Emily's boots skidded on loose gravel as she sprinted toward the sedan. The bundled documents pressed tight against her chest, their edges sharp against her ribs like fragments of buried truth. The air thrummed with the revving engines of the Iron Vow convoy, a thunderous barrier against the Snake Man's crew spilling from their vehicles, 4 in total now, black and battered. Tires gouging the earth as they formed a ragged semicircle. Shouts pierced the chaos, raw and edged with desperation, while the river nearby murmured indifferently, its muddy flow a stark counterpoint to the rising tension. Jacob's voice cut through the din like a blade, steady and unyielding. "Hold the line! Get her out!" He stood at the warehouse door, the metal box's contents secured in a saddlebag slung over his shoulder, his frame silhouetted against the gloom within. Ryan flanked him, wrenching open the sedan's door for Emily, his face set in grim focus, sweat beading on his brow despite the dry heat. "Drive like hell. Head for the ridge road. We'll cover." Emily slid behind the wheel, keys fumbling in the ignition, the engine coughing to life with a reluctant growl that mirrored her pounding heart. The documents felt alive in her lap, Daniel's handwriting a lifeline scrawled in faded ink, names, dates, ledgers exposing the web of greed that had ensnared her family. Outside, the snake man advanced, his pistol raised not in wildfire, but as a prod, jabbing toward the bikers like a venomous fang. "That proof's ours to bury. Harper's ghost won't haunt us anymore." His crew fanned out, bats and chains glinting in their grips, faces hardened by the same corruption that had twisted Daniel's path. One lunged at a rider near the flank, the impact sending a bike tipping with a metallic screech. But the Iron Vow responded not with fury, but precision, engines surging forward in a coordinated push, forcing the attackers back without a single shot fired. The air thickened with the acrid bite of exhaust and the metallic tang of fear, gravel crunching under retreating boots as the bikers' loyalty formed an unbreakable shield. Emily floored the accelerator, the sedan lurching forward through a gap in the line, tires spinning dust that billowed like a smokescreen. In the rear view, she caught glimpses. Jacob mounting his bike in one fluid motion, the convoy peeling away in her wake, engines roaring a defiant symphony that drowned the snake man's curses. Bullets? None yet. These weren't killers by trade, but enforcers clinging to shadows, their bluster cracking under the weight of exposure. Ryan braced against the dashboard, scanning the map with one hand while radioing coordinates to the riders. "Ridge in 2 miles, narrow pass. They'll bottleneck there if they follow." The road climbed sharply, winding through scrub-choked hills where thorny bushes clawed at the undercarriage, the sedan's frame groaning under the strain. Emily's hands slicked the wheel, her mind a whirlwind of revelations. Daniel hadn't abandoned them out of cowardice, but to shield them from this very storm, his vow to Jacob, a bridge across the years, the clinic's administrator, the snake's ties to diverted funds, it all converged here, in this cache of justice, waiting to be unleashed. Below, the mill town's decay receded, the river a serpentine ribbon glinting under the sun. But pursuit hummed in the distance, engines straining, closing the gap. At the ridge's crest, the pass narrowed to a choke point flanked by sheer drops, wind whipping fiercely and carrying the sharp scent of pine resin from higher ground. Emily braked hard, the sedan skidding to a halt as the convoy encircled her, bikes positioning like guardians at a sacred rite. Jacob pulled alongside, his face streaked with dust, eyes fierce with the fire of unbroken oaths. "Radio the press, old contacts from the war. Let the light in." Ryan was already on it, his device crackling with connections to journalists who'd covered veteran scandals before, voices responding with urgent questions that promised amplification. The snake's vehicles crested the rise moments later, slowing as the trap revealed itself, the bikers' formation a wall of chrome and resolve. No escape without confrontation. The lead SUV halted, doors flying open, but hesitation rippled through the crew. The snake man stepped out alone, pistol lowered now, his tattoo stark against sweat-soaked skin, the bluster ebbing into calculation. "This ends bad for all," he called, voice carrying over the wind's howl. "Hand it over and we walk." Jacob dismounted, helmet under one arm, the saddlebag's weight a testament to the promise. He walked forward unhurried, the ridge's edge dropping away behind him like the abyss of forgotten honor. "It ends with truth. Daniel's proof goes public. Your skims, the clinic's cuts, the lives you stole from. We're not the ghosts. You are." Sirens wailed faintly in the valley below, drawn by the radioed alerts, red and blue lights flickering like beacons of accountability. The snake man's face twisted, allies murmuring retreat, their greed no match for the gathering storm of exposure. Defeat settled like dust in the air as the crew backed off, vehicles reversing down the slope in a cloud of defeat, engines fading into the horizon. No shots, no blood, just the poetic justice of vows upheld, corruption laid bare under the unrelenting sun. Reporters arrived soon after, notebooks and cameras capturing the handover, documents passed with steady hands, Jacob's testimony a gravelly recounting of brotherhood and betrayal. Emily stood beside him, the wind tousling her hair, Grace's voice echoing in her mind. Stand firm. The story broke that evening, headlines rippling across networks, the clinic's rot unraveling, funds redirected to those in need. Days blurred into healing as the convoy escorted Emily home, Grace's recovery bolstered by cleared debts and community support sparked by the exposé. Daniel's trail led to a quiet revelation. Alive, in hiding up north, watching from afar to protect them. His return now possible with shadows banished. He arrived under a starlit sky, older and weathered, embracing Emily with arms that carried the road's scars, Jacob clasping his shoulder in silent absolution. The vows kept, Daniel murmured, voice thick with years unspoken. In the porch light's glow, the Iron Vow riders raised a toast, coffee in mugs. Engines idling like old friends, as family reformed, not by blood alone, but by loyalty's enduring flame. Emily watched the horizon, the helmet on the railing, a symbol of journeys ended and begun, redemption woven into the fabric of quiet nights and open roads. Honor's legacy rode on, in actions profound and promises eternal. Thank you for riding along on this tale of unbreakable vows and chosen kin. If it touched your heart, please subscribe for more stories of quiet courage and moral fire. We'll keep the road lit together.